Hi guys, this is kind of spur of the moment. I didn't have plans really to film anything on this topic, but in my most recent video, I mentioned that I have a list of nonfiction titles that I'm especially excited about. And some of you asked if I could share it. And at first I was hesitant, and I can't put my finger on why. There are certain aspects of my reading life that I have guarded more closely over the years of having my channel, and unless I specifically want to share a certain TBR with you, I tend to keep it private now. But the reality is, with the goals that I mentioned in that video, to read 3 books that I owned pre-2020 for every one book that I buy, coupled with the fact that I want to mostly buy nonfiction from here on out, including most of these titles, preferably when they come out in paperback. I'm tracking their paperback dates. All of that means that it could be 2 or 3 years before I read most of these. And so if I wait to discuss them with you or even mention them until I've read them, we're going to be waiting a little while. And in the meantime, maybe some of them will have caught your eye just by me mentioning them, even though I don't know specifics, obviously, because I haven't read them. So I figured, let's just do this. Let's go rapid fire through these titles. It's going to be a bit hodgepodge, but bear with me, and I hope you hear about some things you're interested in. Oh, and before we get started, a reasonable question at this point is, how did I even hear about these titles? How do I find the nonfiction titles I want to read? And it's a diffuse answer. I mean, I have people in my life whose nonfiction taste I trust and who I go to for recommendations. So my uncle is one of those people. I've mentioned him before on this channel. He is using his retirement wisely, people. Read all the nonfiction once you don't have to go into an office anymore. And I mean, I get a lot of recommendations from Steve's channel as well, and his blog. At the end of the year, he has the best nonfiction that he read that year, and he reads more nonfiction than any human on the planet. He has a lot of great starter kit series as well, and it's always fun for me when I wanted to read a book previously and then I hear him mention it in one of his starter kits, and it pretty much goes on the list after that point. And I also find best of the year lists are more interesting to me from the nonfiction side, especially a major outlet like the New York Times. I mean, their top 5 fiction books of the year, typically I could take them or leave them, but nonfiction, not every year, but most years, there are a few titles on there that really, really do catch my eye, and I value the input of an editorial team from various outlets to, point you in the direction of these accessible but really, really well done titles. I have my list here, and we're just going to run down the titles in the order that I wrote them. And most of them fall into the categories of nature, history, science, and biography loosely. But instead of bunching them by categories, I thought it would be fun to mix it up and just see what came to me in any given moment. First one is Midnight in Chernobyl by Higginbotham. I'm guessing many of you have heard of this one. It's about the Chernobyl nuclear disaster and came out last year. And I really like the angle that this seems to be taking, of a British journalist questioning the propaganda of the West about the Soviet Union, as well as the propaganda within the Soviet Union to obscure the facts of the disaster. Then I have 2 animal-related titles that were both 2019 releases. One is Mama's Last Hug by Frans de Waal, which is about animal emotions, the complexity of their emotional experiences and of their bonds. And the other is called Wildhood, the epic journey from adolescence to adulthood in humans and other animals. And let me look up these authors. It's Barbara Natterson-Horowitz and Kathryn Bowers. And I think the subtitle is pretty self-explanatory, but I'm fascinated by this idea. As soon as I saw this title, I think it was on Steve's end of the year list, I was like, yes, let's do it. I teased in my last video that I've only bought 1 book so far in 2020, and this is that book, Border: A Journey to the Edge of Europe by Kapka Kassabova. And from what I understand, it's a mix of travel writing, history, some sociology, and memoir involving the border between, or among, because it's 3 countries, Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. And my eyes just lit up when I saw this in a bookstore. And her newest title is coming out this year as well. And if I like this one, I'd be very surprised if that weren't an immediate pre-order. Then we have Pale Rider by Laura Spinney, which is about the Spanish flu of 1918, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, killed more people than World War I, which obviously had just ended, which is insane to think about. And when I told my parents about this book, we decided that we're going to have a little book club on it post-London. I'm trying to get them to read more nonfiction, but it's hard because a number of these titles are on the longer side, and so this one is like a normal book size, and we're going to read it together. Then I already told you guys that on my winter TBR is Wolf Nation, The Life, Death, and Return of Wild American Wolves by Brenda Peterson, and if you want to hear a little bit more about that, you can go watch my winter TBR video, but I'll have things to say about this one soon. And then another book that I have mentioned several times is this biography of Angela Carter called The Invention of Angela Carter. And it's been a little while since I read a biography. I think I've only read one or two last year, and I don't understand why because I have found that I love them. So this is next. A book I'm very grateful to have been sent by the publisher, and I say very grateful because it weighs a ton, and so I know they paid extra on postage to send it, is called Proust's Duchess by Caroline Weber, and this is about three women who inspired a major character in Proust's work and about their lives in turn of the century Paris. I heard an interview with this author around the time this book was released, and normally it is not the kind of thing that would catch my eye, but this interview just made me hooked on these women's lives already, and I am excited to report back once I've read this because I suspect many people wouldn't think it's in their wheelhouse, but that it actually is. The next three are war-related books, and I am interested in reading about a number of global wars, just not the military aspect of war, but pretty much everything else. Particularly when it comes to World War I, like many people, I am interested in how this even began. And so I want to read The Sleepwalkers by Christopher Clark. The subtitle is How Europe Went to War in 1914. I've heard amazing things about this book and about several other books on the same topic. The next book is called Hiroshima by John Hersey, and he's a journalist who interviewed survivors soon after the bombing. And apparently this book transformed the world's perspective on the bomb in a number of ways. And the last one is also very well known. It's called Black Earth by Timothy Snyder, and it's a Holocaust book. Timothy Snyder, of course, is the author of Blacklands, and I've never actually read any of his work, but just the description of Black Earth and certain people whose opinions I trust quite a lot. They've propped this one up as a Holocaust book amongst a sea of Holocaust books that does something a little bit different. Now, it's hard to get more depressing than the Holocaust, but I feel like this next book is like knocking on that door. It is The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace-Wells. And apparently he uses numbers in terms of how fast we can expect the Earth to heat up, numbers that are much grimmer than what we typically hear. And he takes a very clear-eyed look at what the Earth will be like at any given temperature that we can expect. Yeah, I think that this one will be shocking, but God, we need that. We should be shocked about this, you know, and I think that was one of his main aims in writing this book. Another biography I want to read is Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom by David W. Blight, and I've heard from people who have admired Frederick Douglass and have read Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, his first autobiography, but haven't read his other autobiographies, and they were just kind of blown away by all the things that they learned about him in this volume. Something that's a bit more out there is God, a Biography by Jack Miles, and Steve is such a champion of this one. And as I mentioned in last week's video, I want to do a project where I read especially the Hebrew Bible and various perspectives on it. And this is a really smart idea. It is to just take the God of the Hebrew Bible and treat that text like it is his biography and like he's a historical character. Come upon a string of books now with particularly helpful subtitles. So a nature book that I've had on my radar for several years is Foxes Unearthed, A Story of Love and Loathing in Modern Britain by Lucy Jones. Another one is Last Witnesses, An Oral History of the Children of World War II by Svetlana Alexievich, which was gifted to me by my roommate for Christmas because she knows that I love Svetlana Alexievich. And then another title that fits the bill here is Unruly Waters: How Rains, Rivers, Coasts, and Seas Have Shaped Asia's History by Sunil Amrith. This was shortlisted for the Kindle History Prize last year, and if you're not familiar, I'll link it below. It is a great resource to find history titles that really have a worldwide focus in many cases, and there's a lot of variety within their list. They are honoring historians writing in English from all over the world. And this is an example of that where, you know, it's funny, I was talking to one of the chairs of the judges, and he is an Asian history professor at Oxford, I believe. And I brought up this book and mentioned some people had said it was niche. And he just got this look in his eye, and he's still, you know, incredibly friendly about it. But he said, it's funny because to me, the Holocaust is a niche topic. It's not viewed as such, but it's incredibly niche in the scope of world history. Asia, on the other hand, has half the world's population, and yet it's relegated to the idea of niche in the Western consciousness. And I just stood there and took it because I was like, damn you right. One that will maybe test my burgeoning love for biography is Frédéric Chopin, A Life and Times. 700 pages of his life and times. This was a gift from Steve, and I know I can do it. I'm almost positive I'm really gonna enjoy it. I just need to make myself start it at some point, and then I will report back. Hopefully this year. I think I might put it on my summer TBR. We'll see. See if that happens. A departure from a lot of these subjects is No Visible Bruises: What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us by Rachel Louise Snyder. I heard an interview with the author last year because it was a 2019 publication, and I was kind of floored by the statistics and her framing of the issue of our societal blindness to so many of the warning signs of domestic abuse. And also just the descriptions of some of the interviews she includes with the women in her book. The first, I think, 2020 release that's on here is Metazoa: The Evolution of Animals, Minds, Consciousness, and Sleep by Peter Godfrey-Smith. And it's funny because I don't know much about this other than the subtitle, except that I heard somebody close to this book talk about it in an extremely engaging way because it was for a job interview, for a job I didn't get, but you know, you take book recommendations where they come, people. And the book that was just published is Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. As you probably noticed, I don't have many politically oriented books on this list so far. And Ezra Klein is the founder of Vox, and so I was not inclined necessarily to hear from somebody who's part of polarization, you know, why we're polarized. But I have heard several interviews with the author now, and he has completely won me over in the erudite way that he talks about this topic, and I actually think that I would get a lot out of this book. It's funny to me when people brush aside the whole idea of book criticism, like, I don't need their opinions, because what that tends to indicate to me is that the person just hasn't found a critic whose work they love and truly enjoy following, and I'm guessing there's a critic out there for almost everybody, but one of mine that I respect immensely and whose work I do follow is Parul Sehgal, who's one of the main reviewers for the New York Times. And one of her top 10 books of last year was called Lakota America: A New History of Indigenous Power. And I apologize about the author name pronunciation. I'm going to say Pekka Hamalainen. I did look up how to say that, but couldn't find like a source that told me concretely. I've just looked it up, and I am surprised that this next title was only published in 2018 because in my mind, it's been on my TBR for ages. It's The Personality Brokers: The Strange History of Myers-Briggs and the Birth of Personality Testing by Merv Emra. And I've always thought of personality tests as sort of, I don't know, trumped up versions of horoscopes. Like, people put so much store in them too. I don't know. I don't think it tells me much about you if you say you're like an ENTJ, other than how you view yourself. And the idea that you want to discuss those qualities in you that you think are reflected in those letters. But yeah, I'm really eager to learn more about it. Another biography you won't be surprised to hear that I want to read is Sontag: Her Life and Work by Benjamin Moser, which was published last year. And as many of you know, she's one of my absolute favorite authors, and I am properly in awe of her, which is sort of what Susan Sontag would have wanted, I gather, for people to be in awe of her. For many years, I've loved languages and language learning, and so when I heard about this next book on a Spanish language podcast, I had to put it on here. It's called Babble Around the World in 20 Languages by Gaston Doran, who is Dutch, and I think reads 10 languages and speaks 6 or something like that. It's very, very Dutch of him. But it's the 20 languages that have the broadest populations of speakers in the world, and he highlights certain angles of each language. So I think for Spanish, for example, he highlights grammar. For other languages, he highlights their history or a certain element of their culture, and it's very much up my alley. These next two I want to read in tandem. One is called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, An Indian History of the American West by D. Brown. And I believe this was first published in 1987 and has been extremely influential since then. And the other book that I want to read with it came out, I believe, last year. It's called The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the Present by David Truer, who's a member of the Ojibwe tribe and grew up on a reservation, and was really struck by D. Brown's conclusion that Wounded Knee sort of was the end point of a lot of Indian culture, and for somebody who's growing up in that culture now, he's sort of making the point, 1890 to present, like, we are still here, and here's what's going on, everybody who has read D. Brown's book. Hi, Nugget. No, don't eat that pen. It will not be satisfying for any of us. Hey, you want to see the public? Hey, you're awake. Unlike how you usually are. You guys, he's getting so much bigger. Isn't his face so much better than it was before? Oh, he can see all the birds from this perspective, and he wants to go eat them. Okay. Go get them through the glass. The second to last book I want to mention is called Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln by Doris Kearns Goodwin, which I think was one of the main inspirations for the film Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis from a few years ago, which I love that movie. You know, inspirational horn music and all. And I mean, Abraham Lincoln is a revered figure in American history, and we know the outlines of his life, but I know very little about his actual political career and how he accomplished things once he got into office. Lastly, you know, appropriate to end on this note in terms of my interests, is the Brontes' Wild Genius on the Moors by Juliet Barker. It's her collective biography of the family. And after reading some, let's generously call it some nonfiction on the Brontes that was biography light, I would say, I really, really have been craving rigorous nonfiction look at them. Let's just put it that way. That is my nonfiction list currently, and it's organic, of course. I'm adding things often, and you know, hope to be adding many more titles in the future. But this is plenty to start with. I haven't included memoirs because I categorize memoirs very differently mentally, and so maybe I'll share a memoirs list with you at some point. But for now, I am really eager to hear what you think about these titles. I should say I've researched each of them to such an extent that I'm going to read them. So even if you write something very negative about one of them, you know, I will be discovering their flaws for myself at this point. But I would still be interested to know. And also, if you've become interested in any of these just by the title, I love hearing what just clicks for a person and what makes you say, yes, I need to read that. Do let me know in the comments, and I will see you post-London for another video.